Hi, and welcome back to Continual. It's time for another episode of Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the authors that bring them to you. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and we have a whole stack of stuff to add to that to-be-read pile tonight, especially since we're coming up on those holidays and it's time to start buying those books that make great gifts. Let's go around and see who all is bringing in new contributions for the evening. So, Alma, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Alma Alexander, otherwise known as the Duchess of Fantasy, but although I tend to make a thing about spinning flights of fancy, today I'm here with one and possibly two nonfiction books. The first one is this. It's called The Alchemy of Word, Dreams and Transformations. And basically, this is a book for, I think everybody here is pretty much familiar with this. If you walk into a strange house for the first time and you see a bookshelf, you kind of wait for a moment where the host is doing something else, and then you sidle over to the bookshelf and you kind of examine the shelf to see if you recognize any of the books there. And there's couple of reasons that might work, because one, you're either going to find some old friends who you love and you know that the host, your host is in the other room, but he's your bosom buddy and you know it. You're going to find a bunch of books that you may or may not be copacetic with, but you can build a bridge here. Or you might find a bookshelf that makes you go, huh? And wonder why you're here in the first place. I freely confess to being a sneaky bookshelf inspector, and basically what this particular book is, it's an invitation to anybody who reads it to come along into my house and walk with me along my bookshelves and explore my shelves and my books and how everything that I have on those shelves has changed me and transmuted me into the writer that I became along the way. And the second book is about cats, but more about that later.
All right. So, Jack.
Hi, I'm Jack Cullen. I write urban fantasy and sci-fi comedy. Today I'm going to be talking about a book called Locke's Galactic Mess, which is the first of a trilogy called Locke Ferguson versus the Aliens. And it's about a janitor who's got to fight an alien that had abducted him when he was a kid.
And we've been hearing about this book for a while, so it's about time.
I haven't been able to make one of these hot off the presses panels to work with my schedule till now.
Layla.
Hi, I'm Layla Dorine. I write LGBTQ fiction and romance. And tonight I'm here to talk to you about a holiday book. And it is A Daddy for Christmas River, which is kind of a return to my Foggy Basin from this summer.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy, sometimes with and sometimes without strong romantic elements. I also write several different kinds of romance, and with Jeannie Adams, I write the Outcast Station science fiction series. Excuse me, I'm here to talk tonight about a book that's a change of pace for me. The anthology behind me, A Spirited and Most Courageous Prince, is a set of short stories inspired by Richard III. And I won't start on my Richard III tear, which some of you have heard, but it's a change of pace for me because it is historical fiction with no magic, no romance, just historical fiction, story of three brothers.
Aaron?
Hi, I'm Aaron Rosenberg. I write novels, short stories, children's books, urban fantasy, epic fantasy, sci-fi, humor, action adventure, pretty much whatever people pay me for. I'm here to talk about The Fated Blade. I don't know if this will actually show up correctly or not, but nope, not really. It is the third book in my Ariad Isles trilogy of pirate fantasy mystery adventure novels.
And Karen?
Okay, hi, I'm here to talk about this book, which is the fifth in my Vampire Legacy series, which I'm currently re-releasing all of them because I finally got the rights back 30 years later. So Vampire Vivienne, and I'm going to be talking about the audiobook of book number 2, which is Bitter Blood.
So let's start off just talking kind of big picture about the various, about the books, right? What's the world we're stepping into, what we're going to get out of it. Now, Alma, let's kind of start about what inspired you to dive in and write about your bookshelves and all of the influences that sit therein.
Well, good while ago, I picked up a little slim novel or volume that was entitled Howard's End is on the Landing. And essentially, this was much the same idea that I've got here. And it's been percolating for a while because, let me put it this way, my house is a library. When I got married, I brought in my books, and then my husband had his books, and then we kept on acquiring our books without stopping. And at this point, I think I can just like move out and open the front door and open this as a local library in the neighborhood kind of thing, because I literally have more than 5,000 books in this house. Every single room is got a bookshelf that's stuffed. Sometimes every single surface that is horizontal enough has a pile of books that is stuffed. I have a to be read pile that is going to kill me one day. It's just one of those ideas that reached fruition at this point. And the way that I made it mine was I'm taking you on my bookshelves, and what this book is about, it's a compendium of, narrative about this is what my bookshelves are, this is what's on them. But there's also stuff that some of which appeared in my Patreon, which has an ongoing rubric called On My Bookshelf, where I write about books that I've read. So there's a bunch of sort of review-like essays, which are not so much reviews as studies of the ideas of those books and what they meant. And of all the books that are there that served to shape my inner core into what I write and why I write it. Things like poetry, things like Shakespeare, a vast range of fantasy and science fiction, a vast range of stuff that isn't. It's kind of relatively straight non-genre fiction. But I mean, I've got, you name a book, I probably got something like it in this house. And it's just one of those, come in, the coffee's hot, let's talk about writing, let's talk about books.
So, Jack, I know you've been working on this world for a while. So what's the big setup for the world we're going to be stepping into on this one?
Well, this one started out as a brain cleanser. I did a non-fiction book about a series of murders that took place in Massachusetts, and it was dark. So I kind of started playing around with something light, and I came up with I wanted to kind of play with the little gray aliens trope. And my other books, the heroes, the rugged, competent, and I wanted to play around with an incompetent character. So in this book, got a guy by the name of Locke Ferguson. He told his cousin when he was a kid he got abducted by an alien. His cousin turned around and told everybody in town, and he became the laughingstock. Wound up with the nickname Probed. And so growing up, he wound up not really fulfilling any dreams, and he's a janitor in this small town, hanging out with his friend Stella, and they just, they hit the local bar, then they game, and that's pretty much their life. His cousin's now the mayor. He's kind of an Eddie Haskell type character, tries to get him to do a UFO seminar, try to get the town on the map for tourism, and unfortunately, this kind of leads to him being chased by a conspiracy blogger named Jeopardy Jones, some government agents, and the alien that had abducted him, because it turns out the alien had done experiments on him, and now he was the key to either saving or destroying the Earth. And that's pretty much it.
All right, Layla. So what's this holiday offering that we're bringing in this time?
So we are going back to Foggy Basin, which was the small town in California that we visited this summer for our kind of small town summer shared world series that we put out. And I decided I loved Haven's brother River so much. He's this like adorable pink-haired character that just has so much energy. And I was like, I have to write a story, and what better I was wandering around and I kept seeing these pink gingerbread houses and pink Christmas trees. And I'm like, I think I have kind of a backdrop for his apartment and his whole theme for his Christmas. And we're going a pink and silver Christmas. And it is just like, it is fun. It is flirty. It is steamy. It is a very light-hearted, angst-free Christmas book. You can pretty much consider it like Insta-Lust. They meet, they hit it off. They go on what's supposed to be like a date to go shoot pool and grab food. And it becomes like eating their meal on the merry-go-round while it's spinning and they're talking. And they just go from there. That their Friday night kind of rolls into Monday morning. And by then they're kind of already hooked on each other. So it's just like it's light and fluffy, and nobody dies in this book like in some of my other creations that have come out. It really is probably the lightest of the 4 holiday stories that I have, and I'm having so much fun finishing it up and getting it ready to go to edits.
So Nancy, and I know a little bit, but why don't you talk a little bit about what brought this particular anthology about, and talk a little bit about your piece in it.
Okay. This is the third of the anthologies dedicated to well, they're not really dedicated to Richard III. They're inspired by him. Author named Alex Marchant started this project, and she puts it all together, edits it, gets the cover, markets it. She's written an award-winning young adult series set in the household of Richard of Gloucester, the future Richard III, a lot of it in Middleham Castle, which is the castle behind me. And as you may be aware, Richard III had scoliosis, which is not kyphosis and doesn't give you a humpback. Scoliosis curves to the side. Just getting that out there for all the Shakespeare fans. Anyway, the proceeds of the anthology benefit scoliosis research in the UK. And so all the authors donated our stories to raise money for that cause, which is actually personal to me because I have scoliosis and had a back fusion in my 30s. The setting for all the stories is late 15th century England, sometime between probably about 1455 and 1480, 1 or 2 is my guess. I can't remember when everybody else set their stories. My story deals with a seminal moment in the reign of Edward IV. And the backstory to it, which I tried to condense in the story and will try to condense now, is that, as you may be aware, Edward IV came to the throne with the help of the Earl of Warwick, the self-styled kingmaker. And as time went on, Warwick's influence over Edward waned, and Warwick didn't like that because he wanted to be the power behind the throne. And Edward's next brother down, George, Duke of Clarence, his emblem was a black bull, but it really could have been a pig because he was incredibly greedy. If there was land out there or a title out there, he wanted it. So he joined forces with Warwick, who promised to depose Edward and put George on the throne. But the problem they had was that the nobility did not come flocking to their standard, and they didn't have enough power to do that. So they went to France, where Henry VI, who was deposed but alive, and I know it sounds messy. It was messy. It's the Wars of the Roses. But they went to make an alliance with Margaret, who was not down with George being the king. You know, she was married to the man she thought should be king and should be followed by their son. Anyway, she agreed to help them. And they managed, before they had to go to France, to almost capture Edward IV. And Edward and his youngest brother, Richard of Gloucester, the future Richard III, and some of their followers escaped and went into exile in Burgundy, where luckily for them, their sister was the Duchess. So things weren't going well for Warwick. Edward had finally gotten Burgundian support. And so in the spring of, I think it was 1471, might have been 1472, I was a history major, but I wasn't big on dates, obviously. But anyway, they came back to England with the goal of defeating Henry's forces and taking back the throne. And meanwhile, George, the greedy one, was very unhappy that his prospects were not going as he expected. And all the women in their family had been writing to him, George, you really should come back into the family fold. You should bring soldiers and help Edward. This is the best thing for you to do. And so that spring, Edward and Richard met with George outside the city of Warwick. And so what my story really looks at is the dynamic among the three brothers, the feelings of Edward and Richard coming up to this. Can they trust him? Is he going to do what he said he's going to do? Or has he gotten a better offer? Because this is not the age of the internet. Letters take a long time to travel. Messengers take a long time to travel. Is this really going to be what he said it would be, or are we going to have a problem? And that's kind of the beginning of the story, which follows through with their reunion.
Aaron, what about the universe we're stepping into since this is book 3?
Yeah, so the funny thing is that it's not even entirely my universe to begin with. You can see the covers behind me. This is actually set in a world called Eldros Legacy, which was created by a group of writers working initially with Chris Kennedy Publishing. And they were doing a shared world, and they invited me to sort of step into it and take part, which was a lot of fun. And, so they sort of presented me with the World Bible, and each of the founding members had claimed one continent, and each continent had its own flavor to it. All epic fantasy, but each with a very different feel to it. And when they showed me the World Bible, there was this one line that said, the Ariat Isles are home to pirates. And I said, okay, what can you tell me about that? And they said, well, that's all we have. Like, that's literally all we know. And I said, well, oh, can I do that? And they said, yeah, have fun. So they actually just let me loose in the Ariat Isles, and I got to actually build the entire setting myself. And it's set off of a continent that was initially designed as being India inspired. So that's what you can sort of get a look at it in the covers. It's got a very sort of medieval India feel to it.
So, Karen,
Okay.
what about your vampire world? Since we
My vampire world is actually our world, but with vampires.
Our world, okay.
It's our world, but there are vampires in it, which nobody knows. But of course, anybody who reads the books, they know that it's overpopulated with vampires. In this particular book, we find our ultimate enemy. This takes place starting in Paris pre-revolution. And Vivienne owns a brothel eventually, because most of my vampires work in hostess kind of jobs. You own a bar, you own a restaurant, she owns a brothel, you got your pick. You can, you got different people coming in, people nobody's ever seen, so if you rough them up a little bit, who cares? Vivienne is very much different from my other vampire in the fact that she basically, if it's good for Vivienne, the world must love it. She is completely a narcissistic sociopath, but in a nice way. She doesn't mean you harm. She just don't get in her way. She's a bit of a hurricane. So we moved through revolutionary France pretty quickly, and, not that quickly. I have had one person complain that this was not a good book because we didn't have a guillotine scene. But she's a vampire, and they weren't beheading people at night because they wanted to do it during the day so everybody could see. So all I could do was give her a visit to the guillotine, and she complains about what a waste of blood. Stupid humans, what a waste of blood. So that's her comment on the guillotine. We eventually move up to modern day, and for some bizarre reason, they made her head of the international organization of vampires called the Cadre. She's not qualified for this. She hates dealing with all the bureaucracy. All she wants to do is have a good time. She's actually 18 years old was when she was turned into a vampire. So every once in a while, she just puts her hair in pigtails or wears some torn jeans and goes to a rock concert or a rave or something, and then picks up whatever looks tasty for the night there. But she's, oh God, she's a hurricane. There's no question about it. She turned up in book number 2 We didn't know anything about her, but as the books went on, she became more and more her own character. It was very exciting. Most people like her a lot. I think because everybody wants to be her, more so than Deirdre, because Vivienne is much more frivolous and she's fluffy. She's pink and fluffy, and she sleeps in a coffin with pink satin, and she loves to dress in pink, and she's just Vivienne.
It's a hurricane.
It is, yeah. Hurricane Vivienne. And you could see it in the books when she shows up in a scene. It's like everything explodes because she elicits different feelings and emotions from everybody in the vampire group. She's a catalyst.
Just an agent of change, an agent of chaos.
Yeah, kind of exactly. Girl. Yeah. Oh, you'd like her.
So let's actually dive a little bit deeper. Let's actually talk about the who, right? Who are we hanging out with?
Oops.
in these various stories? So Jack, I'm going to start with you on this one. So let's talk a little bit more about who we're hanging out with in this series.
Okay, so the main star of the book is Lachlan Locke Ferguson, and he's one of those guys that just hates his life, can't catch a break. Started off with his cousin Tavish told everybody that, he was abducted by aliens. You all get made fun of. And that kind of put him on a path. So now, these aliens come back. He's being chased by the aliens, and he's still lamenting life. So he's got all these exciting adventures, all this stuff's going on, and he's still kind of got a why me. But on the other hand, he's a lifelong geek, and for every thing he's dealing with the aliens and the futuristic stuff, he's able to pull a movie or a TV or a book out going, quantum leap, we can do it this way, or things along those lines. He's counterbalanced by his roommate and lifelong friend, Stella Johansson. She's kind of the polar opposite of him. She's former Army. She's never met a drink she didn't like or a fight that she could avoid. And, it was her lifelong goal to take care of him when she's not chasing married women. So the two of them are kind of this weird dynamic pair. And his cousin Tavish, the one who started all the trouble, who's now the mayor, is half Scottish and half Indian. And he meshes both his parents' cultures together. And he's a very cool character, but he's also a little bit of Eddie Haskell. And he's always trying to scheme to get the town on the map. And somehow Locke always seems to wind up being the brunt of whatever plan when it goes wrong. The new the character that's new to town that comes in is a conspiracy blogger named Jeopardy Jones. And she's got a theory that all the abductions all around are connected. And, she's got this multi-layer thing, and she holds this podcast where she's got a lot of fans, and she's very, very smart. And she's the one that figures stuff out. And Locke just kind of stumbles through this whole adventure, and she's the one that goes this, that, boom, boom, boom. And he'd be lost without her. Those are basically the main characters. There's an agent that comes in later, but he's not worth talking about, though. Book 2, he's one of my favorite characters. And so all of them are just kind of stumbling through this, and they find they know there's a bad alien, but they find there's a good alien, and there's a lot of misadventures and a lot of pop culture references, and basically they're using the power geek to get through.
So, Layla, who have you brought forward in for this lovely Christmas romance?
Well, we have Lux, who is an art teacher. He's new to town. He's actually taking over for somebody who is sick. So he's, living out of boxes still, hasn't settled in. He's only been there for about 3 weeks. And a friend of his, who is pretty much the one that helped him find the job, asked him to stop off and pick her something up from the local dispensary. And River happens to work there. He's the owner. He runs it, and it's connected to his brother Haven's garage and his sister's. That she runs like a gas station, grocery store. So you have the 3 siblings kind of all in one building. So a lot of the story takes place in and around the building, because Haven, up until recently, lived upstairs too. So you'll see him popping in and out of the scene, and get to catch up with him from Twisted Chassis, because he was my MC there. And you kind of get to see the dog that they adopted, Loki Bear. He roams in and out from time to time. You'll see him in different scenes, but mostly it's River. And he's like falling in love with Lux in the days leading up to Christmas. And it's one of those fluffy things. Like, there's a moment where they've got this creature feature. They're both horror movie creature feature fans, like the old stuff, like The Creature from the Black Lagoon and the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And they've got it on the TV, but it's muted because they're actually listening to vinyl records on the record player while they're laying on the floor sketching. And like, that is date time for them, and they're having a blast. They've got the charcuterie tray laid out. They're, it's cozy for them because they're not having to do the tried and true play 20 questions, getting to know you conversation. They just kind of mesh to the point where they're going to hang out and spend time together, and it's going to be a very organically flowing story development.
So Nancy, looking at your slight fixation about Richard III, but I mean, how did you take your approach for your piece in this story?
Well, they're all short stories, so it had to be something that could be dealt with in 5,000 words. So that narrowed down the incidents that were available for use. And I know the history sounds like a mess, and it is a mess, but I'm hoping the way I have laid it out in the story makes it a little clearer. When they were coming up to this rendezvous, Warwick was barricaded in Coventry with his forces, and he was expecting George to join him. Edward and Richard, thanks to their mother and sisters, are expecting George to join them. George has almost as many soldiers as Edward does. It's like 5,000 to 6,000, 5,000 on one side, 6,000 on the other. So if George is actually in league with Warwick and planning an ambush or planning to turn on them in the middle of the battle, they're in real trouble. And so it occurred to me that this was an incident that had stakes that were important, because Edward needs to reclaim his kingdom. If he doesn't, he's dead. His children, he just had a son born while he was in exile, are destined to not have good lives if they're allowed to live very long. And his queen is probably going to be out on the streets. So for him, the stakes are very high. And for Richard, they're kind of high too, because he's thrown in his lot with Edward. And so whatever happens with Edward will happen with him. At this point, he's not married, and he's the youngest of the bunch. He's about 17 or 18 years old at this point. So he is partly serving as Edward's foil, and through this whole period, he was Edward's right hand. And so as they go into this meeting, Edward is very concerned about what's going to happen. He's very frustrated because George has done a number of things that Edward said don't do, or a loyal subject just wouldn't do. And every time, Edward's forgiven him on account of their mother. And now, if George comes and brings soldiers, Edward has to forgive him again. And we could say that Edward wants those soldiers, but he's not happy about that part of it. So that's the gist of the story, really. Edward and Richard are the main characters, the people who went into exile with them and have come back. And George are all supporting characters. So Richard is hoping to see Edward triumph. He's supporting him because it's his duty as his liege man and as his brother. If he gets some benefit from it, well, yeah, that's great. But that's not the main reason he's doing it. And he's also worried about whether George is telling the truth about what's going to happen when they meet on the road. My story is called The Banbury Road because the meeting took place on the road between Warwick and Banbury. And so that's it in a nutshell.
So, Aaron, who are we hanging out with in your series? Who's our favorite pirates?
So these two right here, I can point correctly. It's always difficult with this sort of thing. That's Sundra Aravar and Rui Naidu. They're our two protagonists. Sundra is a prince who is fleeing his homeland because he screwed up one time too many. Rui is actually a merchant's daughter who is also running away because her aunt keeps trying to marry her off. And they meet on a boat, both of them heading off to sort of seek their fortunes for different reasons. Rui's disguised as a man, and their ship gets taken by pirates. So the two of them wind up sort of banding together. They present themselves as brothers because that way at least they've got somebody to sort of watch their backs for them. And they become that it's not a romance between them. They become very good friends. They're very much opposites because Sundra is dashing, charming, handsome, and a little scatterbrained. Very, very impetuous, more than a little spoiled. Rui is very, very smart, very organized, had to work her whole life, and really doesn't fully trust herself. And the two of them wind up not only becoming indentured servants to one of the pirate lords of the islands, but also in the strange position of having to prove their new master is innocent of murder. Because otherwise, not only will the pirate lord get killed, but they probably will as well. So, and then as the series continues, their fortunes within the pirate community continue to fluctuate. And they continue to be thrown into mysteries again and again as the pirates sort of realize that these two, especially together, really have a way of unraveling what's going on around them.
So, Karen, let's talk about some of your favorite vampires here as well.
Vampires just in other people's worlds?
In the series, and
in the series. Well, I have two favorites, neither one of which is my head vampire, Deirdre, because quite honestly, you write 4 books of Deirdre in a row, I get burnt out on her personality. And I think she's more like me than any of the other characters. So I get tired of it. Okay, that's terrible to say. People love Deirdre, and I'm not discouraging you from reading the books. She's got real world problems. She's a reasonable human being, despite being a vampire, and she has good values. But my favorite character is actually Lily, the daughter, who showed up in book number 4, because she doesn't take any crap from anybody, nothing. Especially her mother, who she politely refers to as the bitch who left me for dead. So she's not a fan of Deirdre, but Vivienne just captures your heart. I hate to keep saying that, but she's so much fun. And you're thinking, if it didn't mean that I might end up on the menu, you'd want to be with her. You'd want to go out on the town with her. She'll just do anything and say anything. And she doesn't actually kill people. None of my vampires do unless they're doing something they're not supposed to do. Because it's a world in which vampires want to keep their presence secret. This book blows everything out of the water because there's another organization called The Others, who turned up in revolutionary France, but she didn't know what they were. And they turn up in present day, and their idea is to kill all the vampires. Just kill all the vampires. They are not vampires themselves, but they do manage to live a very, very long time. So they're trying to kill all the vampires. They get into cahoots with 2 news people, Terry Hamilton and Bob Smith, who run a show called Real Life Vampires. And they do these really hokey dramatizations of things that may or may not have happened. And they're letting the whole world know that vampires exist. And this is just a disaster for everybody, because you don't want the world to know that you exist if you're a vampire. And like I said, Vivienne is now currently in charge of this international organization that has been around since before she was born. And she's just blowing it all all over the place. And she has one problem. She has one man that she fell in love with a long time ago, and she thought he was dead. But in my books, nobody stays dead for too long. So her lover, her love of her life, Edward, shows up again, and all hell breaks loose. So this is one of my favorite books because of Vivienne. And we have Mitch, who's Deirdre's husband, and he's a good guy. And we have Victor, who we don't really know that much about Victor, except for he's really old. And everybody says at the end of book 3 that he's just not all there anymore. So you just don't know with Victor what's going on in his head, but he's so old. He's the first vampire. And I have a whole mythology about that, and I never wrote that book. But so Victor's fun, Lily's fun. There's a whole bunch of subsidiary characters. Vivienne likes to get all different types of men and transform them. So we have Jules, he's gorgeous. He looks like he should be on the cover of a romance novel. And we have Claude, who is this incredibly large vampire. And he's an interesting character. He turns out he's a really good guy, to know and to have around. So, that's it really. I mean, we have other people that show up. I've got a favorite in book number 6. It was Maggie Richards, and she's not a vampire, and she's interesting. And we have Max, who is the man who transformed Deirdre, and actually transformed Vivienne too. So she and Deirdre are blood sisters. And Max dies at the end of book number 1, but like I said, they're never really dead. Vampires never die. So.
Yeah, undeath only lasts so long.
Yeah.
So Alma, let's talk a little bit about, what's one of the favorite books that's on your shelf that made it into the book?
Oh, that's like asking which is your favorite child.
Nobody ever said I played fair.
Connected to Nancy's particular bailiwick, I have a whole shelf full of Sharon K. Penman books.
Awesome.
And one of her things was The Sun in Splendor, which is the whole Richard story, which is a book that's a doorstop by itself. But my favorite of her books is the so-called Welsh trilogy, which is Here Be Dragons, Falls the Shadow, and The Reckoning. And essentially, I went to school in Wales, and I know Wales, and she made me fall in love with Llywelyn of Wales. Both Llewellyns of Wales, pretty much radically in those books. So that made it into this particular thing as a something to talk about, because honestly, people who can breathe life into history like that are pretty damn rare. The Alchemy book is kind of available for pre-order right now, but it's coming out in 26. It's being released on the 26th of this month. But might I just use this particular thing to segue from Nancy to Karen and her Agents of Chaos, because there's another book that's out right now, and its official title is What the Censored Is It About Cats, because I have in polite society not to use the word that actually sits there, but let me just explain. Back in the mists of time during a particular Worldcon, I was on a panel which was the best attended panel I've ever been on in my life. There was 4 of us on the panel, and the room was packed. There were people sitting in every available seat. There were people sitting on the floor wherever the floor was available, along the walls, on the aisle behind the panelists. There were people hanging out at the door. And the title of the panel was What the Fuck Is It About Cats? Basically, for the rest of the convention, no matter what else we did and where else we went, the people stopped us, the 4 of us from the panel, in the corridor, and said, "You were in the cat panel." The book that came out of that the censored variety, basically deals with the fact that I began my life by being owned by dogs. And then things changed and I got my first cat, and I haven't looked back since. And really, what the fuck is it about cats? Because they kind of just take over. And that book, one of the cats that it stars is this particular little Moggy. And I do apologize for my camera. I don't know why it's out of focus. But it's him. I've got a Princess and the Pauper situation because he is an ex-street cat and got a cropped ear, which meant that he was a catch and release street urchin who is half blind, and I have no idea how he survived his kittenhood in the first place. And as I said, I've got a Princess and the Pauper situation because my other cat is a retired Grand Champion Maine Coon who is twice his size, and I think that she thinks that he's a species of kitten because he's basically just sits there and lets her lick him into shape. And he thinks that I got the other cat as a living cushion because if she lies down somewhere, he just goes and hurls himself on top of her and just basically goes to sleep there. So that book is available now. Honestly, if anybody you know likes cats, it's a good Christmas stocking stuffer as far as that goes, because essentially my current two cats have got internet incarnations as this guy's called the Little Emperor and the Maine Coon is called the White Lady, and the White Lady has a following. If I put a White Lady post on Facebook, I have 50 likes in the space of 20 minutes because everybody wants to know what the White Lady is doing. She's the gigantic goof. She is a champion, royal, regal, massive Maine Coon cat, but honestly, the things she does. And this book is at least partly deals with the joy of it all. So that's my two nonfiction Christmas offerings. One is about books and words and all of the glories of that. The other one is, well, what the fuck is it about cats?
Well, you know, that book ends the holiday book shopping well.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, taking a look, one of the great joys about being a writer, of course, is what are the unexpected things we discover along the way, right? We all have to do our research. We all have to sometimes get a little bit creative with our facts. But, you know, there's always these things that come up in the process of creating a book or working on them, editing, researching, all this kind of fun stuff. So, Layla, what's something for you that came up when you were working on this one?
I just had fun exploring different dispensaries to get an idea of what his shop was going to look like. He makes a lot of polymer clay incense burners and stuff, so I spent a lot of time browsing the incense burners and taking pictures and looking at just really creative ones, not the generic you see 4 of them in the shop, but the really unique pieces. And that was where I really had the most fun because he is an artist as well as the shop owner. His mom actually had a pottery wheel. And so he would watch her and he'd play with the remnant pieces of clay she'd give him and later the polymer clay. And he just makes stuff out of like leftover bits. So a lot of the research was just getting an idea of like what creating leading into Christmas. And of course, having the art teacher be his partner, it gave me like a good segue for them together. It's just like, they can be in a room and they can be creating and they don't have to be, you know, actively engaging with one another to still be present. And every now and again, like glance over and share a look and see what the other ones come up with and, you know, maybe feed somebody a piece of food. It gets to have a very warm and yet undertoned romantic feel rather than the in your face making out like teenagers on the couch.
What about you, Nancy?
Well, I had a realization that in all the years I've been reading about the Wars of the Roses and Richard III had never struck me before. The story centers on Edward and his problem with George. But the generation before their father, in one of the many messy settlements during the Wars of the Roses, was declared by Parliament to be Henry VI's rightful heir. Henry would live out his reign, and then he would be succeeded by York and his sons, disinheriting his son, which naturally didn't make his queen very happy. Anyway, conflict arose over that, as it tended to so often. And in that period, people turned their coats a lot. So the Duke of York was holed up in Sandal Castle outside Wakefield, and a bunch of men came and said, "We're on your side. We're here to help you. The Queen's army is coming this way. Let us help you." So Warwick brings them into the castle, and for some reason, and no one really knows why, he left the castle, rode into an ambush of the Queen's army, and the people who had come saying, "We are here to help you," turned on him. And in the middle of the battle, they started attacking York and his forces. And so when I was thinking about Edward's concern about what George was going to do, it occurred to me that if I'm Edward, who was 16 or 17 at the time his father was killed in this battle, along with his next oldest brother, Edward's next oldest brother, I'd be worried that that's what George is going to do. And the similarity of those situations had never struck me before. And I think it's because I was mostly focused on Richard and not on Edward. I'd never tried to put myself in Edward's head. And when I did that, it was like, whoa, of course he would be worried about that. So that was kind of an interesting thing to explore in the dealings with Edward and Richard.
Aaron, how about you? Since you got to go create your own little corner of this storied world.
Well, it's I do a lot of research, obviously, for my books, like most of us do. It's so easy and fun to fall down the research rabbit hole. For me, for this series, I think in particular, one of the things I always like to focus on is food, both because I love food and because it's very sensory and it really sets a place and a tone for you. And so with this series, because it's based on ancient India, I was doing a lot of research into Indian food, and I enjoy Indian food, but like most Americans, I think I have a very narrow view of what is food from India, and there's such a huge variety of foods there because India is so large. There's so many different elements to it, and food from one region is so completely different from food from another region. So that was really fascinating to me to be pulling in these references and saying like, oh, they're having this dish with, coconut and mango and fresh fish and things like that, as opposed to, the heavy curries and things that you would normally think of. And I like to think that, I hope that it really sets that tone and that feeling for when you're in the story and they're eating these things and you can sort of appreciate what that might smell like, what that might taste like.
Now you're getting me hungry.
Good.
Karen, what about you? Especially with the amount of history you get to pull in, but what's something you tripped down when you were working on these?
I was fascinated with the guillotine. I'm sorry. The mechanics of the thing and how it was invented and how people viewed it and how they had to paint it red. They painted all the wood red because the color of the dried blood offended the viewers. Why, I don't know. You're going to go watch somebody get their head cut off. You should not be afraid of a little blood.
The original Gallagher show.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Unfortunately, I couldn't take Vivienne on a trip to the guillotine while it was in use. So we had to just rely on other things. I never get to talk about food. And when Aaron brought that up, I thought, you know what? That stinks. I never, ever get to talk about food, except for when they go to restaurants with other people, with humans. And they do associate with humans a lot. And then they have to find something on the menu that they can kind of like suck on. They're fond of rare beef. But they can't actually digest solid food. So it's more like you cut it up into, you're like a little kid. You cut it up into little bits and you kind of put it in your mouth and then, you know, either you swallow it or you deposit it in your napkin. So basically I write anti-food books, except for how blood tastes. We talk about that a lot, how different people taste different. And, you know, some of them are drunk and some of them have issues with their blood. And of course, a vampire doesn't get sick from anything. So, but yeah, I never get to talk about food. Most of the research that I do never makes it into the book. I don't know. Is that unusual? Because, okay, because what happens is like I have pages and pages and pages of research and sites that I've been to. And of course, when I was writing, well, my first book, there was no internet really. That was in I started that book in 19, was it 90? Well, it came out in 93. So I started it in 1989, 1988, something like that. So it wasn't much of an internet presence. So I had like books, stacks of maps of the New York subway and maps of New York and all sorts of different things. And in Vivienne, it becomes very much a flight of fancy after a while when I introduce, because the villains, the others, they're really kind of out there as far as how they maintain their life. And I just had to develop this out. And I'm surprised that people don't complain, because basically it involves transferring the soul of the older person into a newborn infant's body. What happens to the soul of the newborn infant? Well, it's not there anymore. They release that soul. So they're killing newborn babies to put their spirit into. So yeah, it's a little woo-woo, but yeah, that's the
thing about research. Basically, what you know informs what the reader knows, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to pour the entire bucket of facts at their feet.
Oh yeah. And I don't, so I try not to. So
it's the black-footed ferret situation.
So what?
The black-footed. Oh, do you know about the black-footed ferret situation?
Apparently not.
There was a romance novel a couple of years back, which had a situation where a young woman who was out there somewhere in the Wild West found herself in a somewhat compromising position, it being a romance novel, in a tent with a young Native American Indian brave. And I do not know in which language these two would have communicated, but somehow they did. And she gets startled by a noise outside, and he tries to calm her down and starts telling her about the fact that what she heard is not dangerous. It's just this black-footed ferret, and they migrated down across the Bering Strait from I don't know where. And I'm like, oh God, dear God. And it turns out that she basically cribbed the entire thing from a research paper, and the guy who wrote the paper wrote somewhere on the internet saying, hey, that's my stuff. And essentially the whole thing was like, first of all, like I said, which language would they have communicated in? Second of all, if they did, they wouldn't have talked about that. And third of all, if they did talk about that, he wouldn't have known that animal as the black-footed ferret. No. And he'd never heard of the Bering Strait.
The strange, mysterious ways of the language of love. So, Alma, especially considering as personal as both of these books are for you, what's something that came up for you when you were working on these?
When it comes to the book about books, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in your life that you don't even realize that you remember, and that mean things to you. And like, for example, I mentioned the fact that there's a particular bookshop that is attached to an institution in the town where I was born. And my grandfather was a bit of a word nerd, which is probably why I am. But he would take me along by my little hand. And I mean, I was literally not even school-going age properly yet. And he would take me to this place, and then and I was perfectly safe to do this with. He would just dump me in the used book area, and I was just sitting on the floor and quietly read while he went off and talked language with his friends and some fasteners behind the scenes for an hour, and he just came back to pick me up, and off home we went. So in one sense, books were my babysitters. I could be trusted to behave myself, to be perfectly nice and well behaved and non-dangerous. And when I was too little to even know what reading was, I would be handed my father's Reader's Digest copies, and I would religiously turn the pages one after the other, and I didn't even know what I was looking at, but it was words, and it was something. I just had an instinct that this would be important to me. This whole thing would be important to me. This is my building block. This is my foundation. And I've never really stopped doing that. I mean, I taught myself to read when I was 4 years old because my mother wouldn't reread Heidi to me again. Basically, I told her to start again from the beginning when she finished, and she said no. So she went away, and I taught myself to read so I could read it again. And I walked, and this is the first memory of my life that I really trust as being real. I was 4 years old, like pint-sized, walked into the kitchen. She was washing dishes, and I said to her, "Do you want me to read to you?" And she heard, did I want her to read to me? And she said, "Not now, I'm doing things." And I picked up the book, and I opened it, and I started reading to her, and she dropped the plate.
Oh.
I just remember that absolute astonishment, like what just happened kind of moment. But that also meant that by the time I was a year or so older, I'd blown through the entire children's section of my local library, and my father took me to the library and said to the librarian, who was mystified by this, "Give her an adult card." I was 7. By the time I hit school, I was reading Pearl Buck, and they were starting to read Dick and Jane and See Spot Run, and I was bored miserably in my first year of school because I could read, and I did, and they all insisted on starting to learn how just then, and I couldn't understand why everybody just wasn't brought up the way I was, being thrown. You know how in mythology Achilles was held by his heel and dumped into a river that made him invincible? Well, I was dumped into words. And words are my armor, and have always been.
Jack, how about you?
Well, that's the thing. I didn't really know anything about UFOs when I started writing this book. It was just, like I said, it originally started out as a project to kind of cleanse the brain. And boy, is that a rabbit hole.
That might be an understatement.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I learned a lot. It was kind of funny because when I sent in my draft to my editor, he corrected Gray and he wrote it Gray, and I had to tell him, no, when it refers to aliens, it's Jrey and or Grey. I go, and I'll take flack if it's got the A in there. I also learned, Betty and Barney Hill. I live in New Hampshire. They were supposedly abducted in New Hampshire. I didn't even know they existed. And it's a stone's throw away from where I live. I learned a lot. A lot of it didn't wind up in the book, but it was kind of fascinating. And at some points it was a little scary. Not so much about the aliens, but the people involved in the culture. But it was good. It was definitely eye-opening.
Well, sounds like we've got a pretty large collection for everybody to go stack up on that to-be-read pile. So let's make sure before we get out of here, everybody knows where to find you guys. And, of course, what the book is they need to be picking up for this current holiday season. So, website, social media, all the good stuff. So, Alma, you're up first.
You can find me mostly on the almaalexander.org website, which is the Duchess of Fantasy website. Other than that, the usual suspect, Facebook, Blue Sky, social media circuit. The 2 books that you're looking for, the first is The Alchemy of the Word, and that's available for pre-order right now, and it should be available for...
See, the power of the word fixed your camera.
Yes, there you go. That should be available on 26th of November. And the What the Censored, Is It About Cats, is out now on all the usual suspects, including Amazon, so you can go right out and get that. I'm still working on the paperback of that, but the ebook is out there right now.
Jack?
My website is jackcullenwrites.com. I can be found on various social media under Jack Cullen Books. My other series is called Recollections of a Rune Knight. It's an urban fantasy series. And the book I talked about today, Locke's Galactic Mess, is the first of a trilogy called Locke, Ferguson versus the Aliens. And by the time this comes out, the second book, Locke's Earthly Maintenance, should be out in print. So I'll probably be back here relatively quickly. And the third book is called Locke's Celestial Blunder.
Layla?
You can find me at Layla Dorine author at wix.com, at Rainbow Lyrics and Mellow Mushrooms, which is my blog. You can find me on Instagram sometimes, Facebook too much, most recently on Blue Sky. And River's book is available for pre-order on Amazon, along with my other Christmas book that'll be coming out this season, which is A Little Christmas Zachy. One is not coming out on the 12th and the other's coming out on the 13th. So I have a busy month next month.
Nancy?
A Spirited and Most Courageous Prince is available on Amazon. It is in Kindle Unlimited, and it's available as ebook and print. You can find information about me at nancynorthcott.com, which also has my social media links. If you click on Blue Sky and it comes up Nancy North, that's correct. Don't ask me why. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Aaron?
So you can find me at Griffin Rose, GRYPHONROSE.com. Also at Crazy 8 Press, Falstaff Books, Crossroad Press, a bunch of other publishing sites. You can find me on Facebook and Blue Sky and Instagram, all under Griffin Rose. And the book that just came out is, other side, The Fated Blade, which is the third and last book in the Ariad Isles trilogy. It is available through Amazon. I believe it's also up on Barnes & Noble. And you can, of course, find it through the Crazy 8 website.
Karen?
Okay, you can find me at KarenETaylor.com. All the information on the books is there. You can also find me on Facebook as Karen Gallagher hyphen Taylor, which was my attempt to get away from the creepy people that tended to follow me around earlier in my career. I'm also on there as a business site, Karen E. Taylor, writer of Supernatural Tales. I'm on Blue Sky as Old Vampire Lady. I'm on Twitch, where I play retro games as Old Vampire Lady. I recently opened up an Etsy store, which is OVL Shops. So I have all sorts of things going on. Vivienne is available on at Amazon in both ebook, trade paper, and hardcover. Bitter Blood should be coming out real soon as an audiobook, and it is also available on Amazon. And for Christmas, I am releasing an ebook box set, which has all 5 books in it. It's going to go for about $5.99. I'm in the process of stacking all the books together and cleaning up all the, when you put these things together, it's crazy. But that will be available, I think, November 30th, and might be up for pre-order before then. And that's it.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host. And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingprose.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And go stack up those to-be-read piles and make sure to add to someone else's for these holidays. We'll see you again soon.